I told my Amish husband I was pregnant. His first question terrified me. My hands are shaking, and the tin cup is shaking with them, and the water inside makes a sound against the rim, like somebody tapping a fingernail. I'm standing at the kitchen sink. The windows open a crack. I can hear Daniel out by the woodpile. The thunk of the axe, then the pause, then the thunk again, and I'm rehearsing the words in my head like a hymn I don't quite know. Daniel, I think I'm with child. 8 words. I've been counting them since Tuesday. The bread on the counter has gone cold. I never let bread go cold. My mother would say, a wife who lets bread go cold is a wife with her mind in the wrong field. And her mind is in the wrong field, and I know it, and I can't help it. My apron pin is digging into my collarbone. I keep pressing it harder. I want it to leave a mark. He comes in. He smells like split oak and sweat and the lye soap I made in March.
No, February.
February, because the creek was still frozen. He sees my face. He sets the axe handle against the door frame, and before I can get the 8 words out, before I can even open my mouth, he asks me the question, the one I will hear in my sleep for the next 19 years. I was 21 years old. Quick pause. My name is Sarah, and this is Rebecca Amish Home. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, was there ever a moment your own husband or your own father said something you've never been able to unhear? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. To understand his question, to understand why 8 harmless words froze my blood, you have to understand the rule. We didn't call it a rule. We didn't call it anything. In our district, a wife's body wasn't her own, and a husband's body wasn't his own. Both belonged to the Lord and then to the family, and then, somewhere far down the list maybe, to the person carrying them around. Children were a sign. A barren wife was a question the community didn't like to ask. A wife who got with child too fast. That was a different question, and that one had teeth. Nobody ever sat me down and told me this. I just knew. The way you know the stove is hot without anyone burning your hand on it. Mama would set her lips a certain way when our neighbour Mary came back from town with her 6th in 4 years, and that pressed lip look, that was the whole catechism. I learned it before I learned to read. And the rule lived in the small things. The way the aunts would go quiet when a young bride walked into the kitchen. The way nobody ever said the word body out loud. We said the person, we said your health, we said nothing at all. When I was 14, I asked my older sister Ruth where babies came from, and she looked at me like I'd spit on the floor. She said, Sarah, we don't. 2 words, we don't. I remember the dish towel in her hands had a little burn mark on the corner from the bread oven, and she twisted it while she said it, and I never asked again. That's the thing nobody tells you. The rules you obey hardest are the ones nobody ever bothered to write down. Daniel and I had been married 4 months. 4 months and 11 days, if you want the truth, because I was counting, not for romance, for fear. Ruth had pulled me aside 3 weeks before the wedding. She said 13 words. I've counted them 100 times. She said, be still, let him lead, don't ask questions. The Lord made it this way. That was it. That was my preparation. 13 words for the rest of my life. My mother said even less. She handed me a folded nightdress and told me it had been her mother's, and her eyes were wet, and she walked out of the room before I could say thank you. I didn't know what I was supposed to thank her for. I still don't, not really. I loved Daniel. I think I loved him. I don't know if I knew what love was yet, but I knew the shape of him in a room, and I knew he was kind in the small ways that matter. He'd save the last piece of shoofly pie for me. He'd warm my side of the bed with the iron pan. In winter, he'd touch the small of my back when we passed each other in the kitchen, and never say a word about it. He was 23, no, 24. I always get that wrong because he had a boy's face. He pulled at the seam of his left sleeve when he was nervous, over and over, until his mother had to re-stitch it twice a year. He was a product of the same silence I was. Nobody had told him anything either. We were two children with grown bodies, pretending we knew what we were doing. The week before I figured out I was pregnant, I sat in the quilting circle at Anna Baylor's house, and I listened to the older women talk around the thing they were really talking about. Esther said, "A wife learns." Anna said, "A wife endures." Mary, the one with the 6. Mary didn't say anything, she just kept stitching. Her hands moved like they were trying to outrun something. I watched her and I thought, that's going to be me. And then I thought, no, don't think that, and I pressed my needle into my thumb on purpose so I'd have something else to feel. A bead of blood came up on the calico. I covered it with my apron. I think it's still there. I never washed that square. The night I figured out I'd missed my second cycle, the kitchen was lit by one lamp, and the lamp was guttering because I'd forgotten to trim the wick. The wallpaper in our kitchen had little blue cornflowers on it. Daniel's mother had put it up the year he was born, and 3 of the corners were peeling, and I had been meaning to glue them back. I was wearing the green dress. Not the dark green, the soft green, the one Mama made me for my 16th birthday, with the tiny pleats at the waist that didn't fit me right anymore. My feet were bare on the wood floor. The floor was cold. Outside, a barn owl was doing that low cough they do when the weather's about to turn, and I remember thinking, silly thought, please don't let it rain. Please let the sky stay quiet for this. He sat down across from me before I told him. He'd washed his face at the basin. There was still water on his eyelashes. He said, "Sarah, you've been quiet." And I said, "I have something." And he said, "Tell me." And I couldn't. I just couldn't. I opened my mouth and the words went sideways and I started to cry, which I never did in front of him, and he looked at me like a lost boy, like he was the one being told bad news. His hands were on the table, big knuckles, a small white scar across the second one from when he was 7. He didn't reach for me. He didn't know if he was allowed. That's something I think about now. Even in our own kitchen, he wasn't sure if he was allowed. I said the 8 words, "Daniel, I think I'm with child," and the room went so quiet I could hear the lamp eating its own oil. He didn't move. His face did something I'd never seen it do. It went still, the way a pond goes still right before something underneath it surfaces. And then he asked me. He asked me the question. He said, "Sarah, are you sure it's mine?" 5 words, quieter than the lamp. He wasn't accusing me. I knew that even then. He was scared. He was scared because nobody had ever told him how any of this worked. Not the body, not the timing, not what a wife's silence meant or didn't mean. And somewhere in his head, the only frame he had for a wife being quiet was a wife with a secret. My toes curled inside my socks. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth so hard I tasted copper. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I got up from the table and I walked to the bedroom, and I closed the door, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I noticed the quilt had a loose thread coming off the corner. My grandmother's quilt, the wedding ring pattern, the one with the lavender square in center. I pulled the thread. I kept pulling. A whole inch came loose in my hand, and I held it like it was the only true thing in the room. Daniel didn't come in. Not for an hour, not for two. I heard him moving around in the kitchen, putting the bread away, blowing out the lamp. When he finally came to bed, he didn't touch me, he said. I shouldn't have asked that. I said, I know. And then we lay in the dark like two people in two separate rivers, what neither of us understood. And this is the part that took me years to put words to, was that his question wasn't cruelty. It was ignorance with a man's voice. Daniel didn't know how a body becomes a mother. He didn't know what a cycle was, or how to count one, or what the body does in the weeks after a wedding. He thought babies happened somewhere in the abstract, by God's will, by a wife's obedience, by something he wasn't supposed to ask about. The same silence that took my body from me had taken something from him too. It had taken his ability to know his own wife. And the worst part, the part I can barely say, is that for 2 years after that night, I believed his question was my fault. Because I had been quiet. Because I hadn't smiled enough that week. Because in our world, a wife who made her husband ask that question had failed at being a wife. He wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what makes it worse. There was no concept in our house called consent. There was no concept called intimacy. There was no diagram anywhere in our world that showed a woman her own body and named the parts. I didn't know the word for half of what was inside me until I was 31 years old. Let me say that again, because it still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud. I was 31 before I knew the name of a part of my own body, a part I had been using to carry his children for 10 years. 10 years. And what I learned later, much later, was that there is a way a husband can ask his wife about a baby that begins with we and ends with together, and that way had been kept from both of us, on purpose, by people who called the keeping holy. And I carried that. I carried that for a long, long time. What formed after that night wasn't a fight. It was a weather pattern. Daniel and I never spoke of his question again. Not once. Not in 19 years. But it lived in the house like a third person who never left. I learned to announce things sideways. I learned to put my hand on my belly first, so he'd see before I had to say. I learned to time hard news for after supper, when his hands were busy with the Bible, so he wouldn't have to look at me while he processed it. By the time our second child came, I had a whole system. I would tell him outside, never inside. I would tell him while he was working with his hands, never sitting still. And I would never, ever start with the word I. I'd say, Daniel, the Lord has been good. That was the code. He always understood. And every time, his shoulders would do this small drop, relief and shame in the same motion. And he'd say, praise him. And we'd go on with our day. That was love. In our house. A code. A workaround. Two people protecting each other from a silence neither of us had built. The thing about a community like ours is that you find out, slowly, that nobody is alone in it. And that's almost worse than being alone. It came out at the wash line, mostly. The wash line was where women talked, because our backs were to each other and our hands were busy, and nobody had to look anybody in the eye. Anna told me once, between hanging 2 of her husband's shirts, he didn't speak to me for a week after Eli was born. I said, why? She said, he thought I'd planned it. 6 words. She kept hanging shirts. And then there was Mary, the one with the 6. Mary said to me at a funeral, of all places, standing by the food table, Sarah, did Daniel ever ask you, you know, that? She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I almost told her everything. I opened my mouth. And then her mother-in-law walked over with a casserole dish, and Mary's whole face shut like a cellar door, and we never got back to it. Not in 20 years. Mary's story I learned in pieces, over a long time, the way you learn anything important in a community that doesn't allow stories. Her husband had asked her the same question, almost word for word, with their first. She'd been 17. She had cried for 3 days, and then she had stopped crying, and the not crying lasted, by my count, the rest of her life. By her 4th baby, she had a look in her eyes that I now know the name for, but I didn't then. I just knew when Mary walked into a room, the room got a little colder. When she almost spoke to me at that funeral, 3 other women noticed. I watched them notice. One of them, I won't say who, she's still living, she walked Mary out to the buggy, and they had a short conversation by the wheel, and when Mary came back inside, her face had been reset. That's the only word I have for it. Reset. The community had a way of pulling its women back in before they could finish a sentence. By our 3rd year of marriage, I had learned to stop starting sentences I couldn't finish. I left when I was 40. That's a story for another day. The leaving. But the awakening, the real one, the one that broke me open, that came 8 months after. I was sitting in a small office in a strip mall in Lancaster, on a couch that smelled like lemon cleaner, and a woman named Diane handed me a piece of paper. On the paper was a diagram, just a drawing, a simple line drawing of a woman's body, with the parts labelled in small black letters. She said, "Sarah, do you know what this is?" And I said no, and I started to cry before she even started to explain it. Because I was 40 years old, and I had borne 6 children, and I did not know the name of the place they had come from. My hands went numb. I remember that. My hands went completely numb, and I had to set the paper on my knees because I couldn't hold it anymore. What unravelled in me that afternoon wasn't anger. I wish it had been anger. Anger would have been easier. What it was grief, the deep kind, the kind that has no bottom. I sat in my car in that strip mall parking lot for 2 hours afterward, and I cried for the girl who stood at the kitchen, sink with the tin cup shaking in her hands. I cried for her because she didn't know. I cried for the girl in the green dress on her wedding night, who thought something was wrong with her because she was afraid. I cried for Daniel, too, and that surprised me. I cried for the boy who had to ask his wife if a baby was his because nobody had ever taught him how a wife's body worked. He wasn't a bad man. I need you to understand that. He didn't know. None of us did. And I carried that. I have carried that for a long time. I tried to explain it once to a woman at my new job. She was kind. She listened. But when I got to the part about the diagram, she said, "Sarah, that's so sad." And she meant it, but I could see in her face that she couldn't actually picture it. She couldn't picture a grown woman in a doctor's office learning the word for the inside of her own body at 40. To her, that wasn't a real thing that happened to real people. It was something out of a book. And I sat there with my coffee getting cold, and I realized I am between 2 worlds. The one that hurt me doesn't know it hurt me, and the one I walked into doesn't know what hurt means in the place I came from. That's a particular kind of lonely. There's no word for it. I've looked. There are things I still miss. I want to be honest about that. I miss the sound of horses at dawn, the soft snort of them, the way the harness brass clinks before the sun's all the way up, the way your breath comes out in a cloud, and theirs does too, and for a minute it looks like you're breathing the same air. I miss bread out of a wood oven. The crust on real wood oven bread has a smell you can't get any other way. A little smoke, a little wheat, a little something else I can't name, and I have spent a lot of money on a lot of ovens trying to get that smell back, and I can't. And I miss my grandmother's hands when she was praying. She had knuckles like walnuts, and her thumbnail had a ridge down the middle from 60 years of needlework, and when she folded her hands you could see every year of her in them. That's a kind of beauty I will never see again. I am homesick for a place that hurt me. Both of those things are true. What was done to me, to us, has a name now, and the name is simple. It was silence dressed up as holiness. That's it. 5 words. Beauty and harm can live in the same house, and they did and they do, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I'm building something different now. Not a rejection of everything. I still pray, I still bake, I still hang laundry on a line because I like the way it smells, but a choosing. I get to choose now. And sometimes, when I drive past a buggy on a back road, I lift my hand. I don't know if they see me. I hope they do. I hope one of them is a girl in a green dress, and I hope she lives long enough to learn the name of her own body. If you grew up somewhere your own body was kept from you, like something dangerous, I see you. If you were married before you were taught, if you bore children before you were named, if your husband asked you a question you've been carrying for 20 years, I see you. You survived something. Surviving is enough. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were kept in the dark, and that is not the same thing. To the woman still inside the community, listening to this on a phone she's not supposed to have, I see you. To the woman who left 10 years ago and still can't say the word out loud, I see you. To the woman who's thinking about leaving and is afraid of what it will cost, I see you, and it will cost, and you will survive that cost. To the woman who's been married 30 years and only now hearing what was missing, I see you, and it is not too late. To the woman who recognized herself 3 minutes ago and is sitting very still right now, I see you most of all. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. If there was a moment in this story that felt like yours, a sentence, a silence, a question your own husband once asked, tell me. I read them. I read all of them. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell. About Mary, about Ruth, about the night I finally left. But I'm getting closer. This is Rebecca Amish Home, and if you stay with me, I'll keep telling the truth as I find the words for it. And to the members and Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. You were never the silence. You were the voice it tried to bury.